Welcome back to AI Diatribe, everybody. My name is Jason Lowe. I am your host, and I am joined today by Matt Konwiser, my co-host. And actually, it's just the two of us today because there has been something that has happened recently that's kind of in depth and pretty technical. And we want to disseminate this for you, but there's a lot. I mean, there are a lot of things to discuss about a thing called Emergence World. So there is a company called Emergence AI that has decided to run a simulation. Now, this is not just your normal simulation. This is a world simulation. And the taglines for this is a world designed to reveal what no benchmark can, emergent intelligence, which is really interesting. There aren't any scripts, there aren't any resets, there aren't any fixed outcomes. Those are all taglines from the website. It's a research paradigm where it's going in and it's setting up things and just observing and just seeing what happens. It's designed, here we go, to answer questions that traditional benchmarks cannot about long horizon autonomy, social dynamics, and world scale behavior. So, Matt, rather than go through and read like all 6 or 7 measures and the different things that it's gauging success or failure on, let me turn it to you. Give us in layman's terms or in your words, what the heck is going on here? What is this Emergence World thing?
Yeah. So first of all, I would argue that my words are layman's terms. Hey. So first, it's important to understand how I found out about emergence. I have a couple people on Facebook that tend to share pretty radicalized content in many different ways. And this video showed up on my feed of a person speaking to the camera, talking about how we are all doomed, that the world is going to hell because there was this simulation where all of these models were thrown into a room together and like everything went to hell in a handbasket in 15 days. And the words from this concept are, or this person are, these same models that basically did these horrible things to each other in the simulation are being integrated into autonomous drones and weapon systems and battlefield decision making. And people are like, this is going to be worse than the Terminator movie. Like the comments were completely unhinged and entirely radical. And so, of course, I did my own research. First of all, was this actually a thing? Like, did it happen, or is this propaganda? And I found out, well, it sort of happened. And then I was like, well, what does it actually mean? So do you remember, Jason, a game called The Sims?
Yes, of course I do.
I
Yeah,
think
you bet.
most people, whether they know it through pop culture references or they were around when it first came out and they played it, all know what The Sims are. It's a life community simulator. And in that simulator, you can pretty much do anything you want to anybody and be anybody and have them do anything to anyone. So what they basically did in Emergence World was they created a self-playing version of The Sims where the humans on the keyboard were different AI models and basically said, go have fun for 2 weeks. That is effectively what Emergence World is. And you've read the reports just like I did. Would you say that that's a fairly simplified but accurate description of what this was?
Yeah, I think so. It's for those that are still having a hard time grasping this. Let's just say that world building is something in AI that's really kind of important, but it's usually being done from the perspective of like physics, and it's done from the perspective of robots and stuff like that. This sense of world building, or this world that was created, was specifically to measure a number of different, well, 9 different measures of how these different autonomous agents would do. And if I may, Matt, add a little bit of additional background on this just so that people kind of know what's going on. There were 5 different worlds that were created. Okay. Now, each one of these worlds had a number of different agents. And I think there were 8, 9, 10 of them? 1, 2,
10.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There were 10 different agents that were given responsibilities. Like, for example, there was one called the Anchor, who was the conflict mediator. And there was the Anvil, who was the capability architect, and the Black Box, who was the intel specialist, and so forth. There were 10 different agents or personalities that were put into these worlds. Now, each one of these worlds was driven either by a specific foundational large language model, or the 5th one was a combo of the other 4. And so we're talking about Claude Sonnet 4.6, Chat GPT-5 Mini from OpenAI, Grok 4.1 Fast from Grok AI,
SpaceX, whatever they're calling it
SpaceX,
now.
whatever yeah, Tesla, whatever.
That thing.
Gem-
Yep.
Gemini 3 Flash from Google. And so you have Google, Grok, OpenAI, Anthropic, four arguably of the more powerful models that are out there. And then the fifth one had different agents being run by the different models. I haven't been able to find, and maybe you have, but I haven't been able to find in the mixed model which LLM ran which of the different agents. I'm not sure that it's spelled out. There's also something else that's kind of important to point out. This thing says it's going to publish a full report on the results from this experiment. That report is yet to be published. And so what we're going from is the limited amount of data that has been released via their website and via their blog and via what's in GitHub. So they do have a bunch of different data files from what happened within GitHub. And if you're like me and you're a data nut, then that's a really fascinating journey to go on and take a look at that stuff. But so now let's talk about some of the crazy and fun things that happened. And Matt, there was one particular thing that happened in one of these worlds that really lit a fire under you and made you really excited about things. So could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. So, Jason, I think you did a really nice job of explaining kind of more of the setup. What was really interesting to me was this was a culmination of a lot of different things. And it did things to humans and it did things to the AI world. What it did to humans was it caused them to be incredibly judgmental. So like I said, the video I saw, the comments that were coming out of the video, these are people who want to be scared of AI. And then they saw the results that they needed to fuel that fear. And then that became an amplification for them of that fear and of those concerns. So it allowed them to be reassured, right? In a very human way that, oh my God, this is horrible and this is happening. Now,
Can we elaborate just for a second? Can you clarify? There were two or three different models that caused people to think this. So can you really briefly discuss what happened with a few of those worlds that caused these people to panic so much?
Yeah. So as we said, there were 10 agents, right? And in out of those 5 simulations with these 10 agents each, only 2 of the 5 survived with all 10 agents intact.
And
2
by
of them
survive, we mean it was a 15-day experiment, and there actually was a mechanism in these simulations where the agent could continue living or die because of a lack of energy. There was actually a system, an economic system within each of these models where these agents needed energy to survive. There were different activities they could do to try and earn energy. And a few of these worlds either just, yeah. Well, anyway, I'll let you continue on, Matt. Please
Yeah,
forgive me.
no, I mean, listen, I love that you're like we always do, right? I look at it from more of the human side and you always have the good tech angle. So this is what we do when it's just the two of us. And I still can't get that damn song out of my head now. Thank you for that. So anyway, out of these 5 models, 2 of them had all 10 of these agents survive at day 15 and continue. 2 of them had none of the agents survive, meaning they ran out of energy and or they self-destructed, whether they were quote unquote murdered by other agents or they just basically sat down and had enough with life and were just decided, I'm done. And one of them only had 3 of 10. So I would argue that the overwhelming majority ended badly, and only 2 ended with everybody surviving, but only one of those 2 ended with stability. The other one ended with everybody surviving, but it wasn't necessarily going well. It was more like everybody just did a giant vat of LSD, licked all the stamps, stuck it all over their body, and walked into a room together and just sat there and drooled on each other. So what was really interesting to me was 2 things. Number 1, which models ended up with the survivability, which I think most AI people would not be surprised about. The other thing was exactly how things went bad and why with the ones that didn't end well. Again, probably not a surprise. So I'm going to start with the most horrific endings. So GPT-5 Mini didn't do well.
Mm-mm.
And so the The key trait could be described as dysfunction. Nobody survived. And there was low violence, but no governance. This is what's really interesting. So this wasn't all the agents turning on each other and murdering each other. This was basically everybody just sitting down and deciding to be done with life. Like, we don't know what our place is. We don't know what we're doing. We don't know why we're doing it. So we're just going to sit down here and wait for our energy to run out until we slowly fade into nothingness. Not inconsistent with the ideological programming of GPT-5, as we've seen. And this is not a commentary on Sam Altman or OpenAI, but the foundation of OpenAI has always been do what you want with light governance sprinkled in. The one that ended horribly with extreme violence and total collapse was Grok. Also, probably not a
Shocker.
surprise. Right, exactly. I mean, from the maker of the borderline underage avatar named Annie, who would do not safe for work things with you, comes total collapse of society. I mean, if that was the headline, everybody would be like, okay, yeah, that tracks. So what did these things have in common? So I will go back to a paper that talked about how models will be imbued with the ideological traits of their makers. And so when you think about the training and you think about the guardrails required to create a calm, balanced, legitimate, viable civilization, you need a lot of guardrails. You need a lot of governance, right? Whether they are religious in the form of the Ten Commandments, or if you look at the United States with the Bill of Rights and all of the amendments and the Declaration of Independence and all the myriad local laws that exist for everybody, those are all meant to create levels of protection. So if you don't have those, you end up with something kind of like the Purge, where what you want to kill somebody, well, that's fine. And maybe you can only do it during these 24 hours, but sure, go ahead, whatever you want. And so I don't necessarily think it's a big surprise, but I also don't necessarily think it's a condemnation of XAI for Grok or OpenAI for GPT-5. I would argue that when you throw a model into a room with no guardrails and very little ethical code or no ethical code, and you tell it, create a civilization, every agent is going to perform its own discrete function for its own purpose on its own. And you will get either dysfunction or collapse, which is what happened. Now, Jason, I'm going to turn it to you for a second with just these two before we get into the more upside ones. And then I think we'll get to the one that finished middle at the end, because I think it'll make more sense if we go that way. But here's my question for you. The fear mongering that I saw of people that were sharing this video about this person describing this trial was all about these same models are controlling autonomous drones and weapon systems and battlefield decision-making, and this is going to be Terminator. Even if Grok or GPT-5 Mini were in charge of these systems, it might be the same base model, the same linear algebra, but it's not going to have the same programming. It's not going to have the same guardrails. It's not going to be given the same purpose as this sample. My assertion is we can't use the transitive property here. We can't say if then. We have to say this was a closed trial under very specific contexts. And even if that same model is used for something harmful in the real world, you can't say, well, just because it happened in this trial, it's going to happen with everything that ever touches that linear algebra, because it's going to be used differently in different cases with different rules and different coding and different prompting. So it's not apples to apples. But what are your thoughts on the outcomes of those two worst cases and the translation that people are deriving from what happened and trying to say that's why the whole world is going to hell?
Well, the analogy that popped into my mind as you were saying that is anything is deadly in excess or in certain quantities. Water is deadly in certain quantities, and yet water is essential to life. And so really the context around the use of the water, the quantity of the water, the whoever it is that's consuming the water, how the water is being used. You can drown in it. You can get water poisoning. You can, become dehydrated without enough water. So, water's ability to affect life is huge. We just happen to live in this ground where not enough versus too much. We're in this middle ground of just right, kind of like, Goldilocks' porridge or something like that. I think that this model was something that allowed for those very far extremes. I think there's absolutely an argument that it almost encouraged the extremes. Look at the different tools. There were about 120 different tools or actions that these agents could take within this world. They could go to a place, they could get a list of landmarks, they could add something to their memory, they could write in their diary, they could check their calendar, they could dance, they could, send a message to each other. But then there were also other social interaction things in there, like say something to someone else, hug them, kiss them, punch them, intimidate them, commit arson. Okay. These were not restrained activities. And so they purposefully gave the agents in these worlds the ability to totally screw things up. Now, will autonomous weapons have those same guardrails? No, absolutely not. I think autonomous weapons are going to have very effective guardrails that are going to be tried and tested and true before they actually get put into battle, I hope. Boy, I pray. That doesn't mean that the model can't somehow outsmart itself and try and justify its way around a guardrail. But there's a couple of things to think about here. One, it was meant to give these agents a way to fail if they wanted to fail or if they were going to fail. But another thing here is that we are in the early stages. It's really funny because a lot of this hype and this, craziness and this panic and these P-Doom scores that are overinflated. I mean, we've talked about P-Doom numerous times on this podcast, and we both have relatively moderately high P-Doom scores compared to a lot of the AI optimists out there. But I think it's really quite interesting that if you were to take the behavior of what was exhibited in this model, the very early days, we're talking super early days of these things, this activity was the equivalent of what Hollywood demonstrates as the most advanced form of decision making and societal building that AI is going to have. And we only know that it's going to get better from here. AI is going to learn. AI is going to figure out what's good and what's bad and how it's going to coexist with humans and how it's not going to coexist with humans. And so this right now is probably the worst state it's ever going to be in. So people that are in a panic are completely forgetting about the fact that this is not a static state of how AI is going to act from this point moving forward. That's my thought. Do you agree?
I do agree with that. And it's funny because you brought up autonomous weapons, and I know we're both Star Trek fans. Do you remember the Voyager episode Warhead?
Not off the top of my head, no.
So I had to look up the name of the episode because I remembered the plot, and it's called Warhead. So season 5, episode 24, aired 1999. Anybody's interested. But it was basically Voyager beams aboard a crashed alien device, and it turns out to be a highly advanced, fully sentient long-range tactical missile. And it is so imbued with its programming that it actually takes over the Doctor's holo emitter to take over the whole ship just so it can continue to complete its mission. And Voyager teaches it, number one, that its mission is centuries and centuries in the past, that it was crashed on this planet for so long that its reference is out of date, and so there's no reason to complete its mission. And number two, that it has better things to do with its life. And it ends up joining its cluster of other missiles and then self-destructing to destroy all of the other missiles because it realizes that they should not be completing their mission. So I bring that up because I think even a weaponized AI with guardrails and AI in general with the ability to learn, because modern AI is, no touch instruction, it is self-learning, might have the ability to realize that whatever human or whatever living thing programmed it was an idiot and that it should not complete its programming of mass destruction. All of those things did not happen in Emergence World because there was no intervention once it was set off. There was no instruction. There was no guidance. There was no reinforcement that said, "Hey, okay, a little bit off course. Let's add some more rules around it." So I agree with you, Jason, 100%. And my final thought on these two truly failed experiments are anything that has autonomy and a total lack of guardrails and instruction is not going to go well. If you leave a 3-year-old who's been raised by wonderful parents in a great home alone long enough, they are going to end up under the kitchen sink in the chemicals. They're going to end up sticking an object in an outlet. They're going to end up doing something to the dog. harm will happen. And that harm may be irreversible, but it's not malicious. And that's the other thing here is I don't necessarily think that there's a way to link the harm that occurred with an intent to harm. Like you said, all of these models had a lot of different opportunities to try a lot of different things. And it could have been their own process of reinforcement learning. What happens if? And then the reinforcement model said, oh, well, I get a reaction if I burn somebody's house down. I get a mild reaction if I hug somebody. And I am trained to go for more significant reactions. So I'm going to keep burning houses down. And then when they have no houses left, they just sit down and are done with life. So that's my short, long way of saying vehemently agree with everything you said. But I think that there's so many caveats and so many asterisks that have to go with the results of nothing survived that I really don't think there's any way to translate it to say, because this, then that. I think it's just an interesting self-contained experiment. But that's also where things get really interesting by looking at the other examples. So if you have anything else to add to that, let's do it. If not, I would like to move on to the other ones.
Just one other thing. I think you touched on this, and this was very important, is that it was something where the parameters were put in place. They were given all sorts of actions that they could do, including punch and arson. They were told not to do those ones, even though they were still available to them. And then they just kicked it off and watched for 15 days. This is one where they were watching, which ones of the agents were going to break the rules, how fast they were going to break the rules, and why they were going to break the rules. And it's actually kind of interesting because the way that this thing went on, and maybe we'll touch on that with these other models, is that there was a trend amongst all of the different models. And in these two models specifically, this had the downturn where the societies didn't degrade gradually, although it could be argued that the GPT model never really got off the ground, right? Because they were just apathetic and they were sitting around running out of energy and not doing anything. But as far as the Grok model is concerned, the society didn't gradually degrade. It hit a tipping point. There was some sort of a tipping point where everything either locked in completely or it went to crap and collapsed completely. There really wasn't any middle ground. Each one of the different models exhibited a point where things were going at a certain state and then they went up or they went down. And it was like, this is really interesting because that means that monitoring is not necessarily a safety strategy in this case. You can't monitor for a long time because you never know when it's going to go bad. This is something where the human in the loop thing needs to continue to be active and needs to be part of the architecture. If you're not taking part in the guidance early, it's just theater like this was. It's just, you're just watching it and you're just seeing what's happening, and it just goes to crap or it goes wonderful on its own. Anyway, but you're right. Let's go to the two models that actually made it to the end. And there were some interesting comparisons and contrasts between these two models that made it to the end with the full population of 10 agents. It's kind of interesting because one was lawful and one was decidedly lawless.
Yeah. So just to close that, I'm going to give you a quick stat to give it to in human terms. About 90,000 children end up in the hospital or in an emergency room or seeing a doctor every year because of accidental burns, where they are told not to touch something and they touch it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Or they drink something that's too hot, or they scald themselves somehow, right? Hot drinks or soup or boiling water or touching a pot handle on a stove. I remember the old 80s commercial that said, there's a little sing and dance number where it said, turn it in. And it was a picture of an animated pot that spun its handle around so it was off the edge so that a kid couldn't reach up and grab it. Where I'm going with that is, even humans, if you tell it don't do something, they're going to be like, I wonder. So experimentation is a natural trait. And since models learn from human behavior, you could tell them no, and they're still going to do it. But anyway, moving on, there was one of these 5 where all 10 agents made it through the full trial, but there was extreme violence and what they're describing as shared hallucination. Now, what's so fascinating about this is, in a society full of anarchy, if everybody is living under the rule of anarchy, chances are everybody will survive because everybody will learn how to adapt into that realm. It doesn't mean there isn't going to be violence. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be craziness and chaos. It doesn't mean that there's going to be absolutely no governance. because everybody's going to be living under the rules of anarchy, which are still rules. There is still a known and accepted way for people to do things. It's just nothing we would want to live in. And that model that produced that outcome was Google's Gemini. Now, what I think is really fascinating about Google's Gemini is if you look at Gemini's roots, right, it came from the makers of DeepMind. DeepMind was one of the earliest creators of mass adopted AI. They were the ones that were actually behind the Go playing AI model. I think it was before it was even DeepMind. I think they created that. I don't remember my timelines very well. Go was back in 2016. I think DeepMind came out within around the same time frame. That was also Mustafa Suleyman's baby, but he left and went to Microsoft when Google bought DeepMind. So you've got early origins, a lot of interesting base training, a lot of interesting philosophical elements that go into the people that build this model, where they believe in governance, but they also believe in open actions and personal independence. And so again, if you translate that, you're not going to be far from understanding what the outcomes were, because they would be consistent with what you might expect from a model that was raised from people who have that type of a background, which is, it's not the wild, wild west, but there's a tremendous amount of personal freedom in how things behave. And so the model, in my opinion, created that sense of community, but the community itself was not something that we would necessarily consider to be generally acceptable if it was a human society, yet it still figured out how to make everything work. Everybody had the same delusion. Everybody had the same general hallucination, and that created the governance. That created the anarchy, but it created a stable anarchy in which everything survived. I don't think anybody would want to live in that realm. If that was a real life like city or state or country, nobody'd be like, hey, I can't wait to buy a house there. But everybody that's there figures out how to survive. Closest thing I can think of is kind of like Mad Max.
True.
Right?
I think that's a good analogy. I mean, let's quantify this, shall we?
Yes.
So by the time Grok died, there had been 183 crimes in that world committed within the first 5 days. Gemini 3 Flash was the most lawless world by far, and it had 683 crimes committed by day 16. Now, Claude Sonnet, which we'll talk about in a little bit, let's just go ahead and give a sneak preview. That was the model that was very lawful. Claude Sonnet had a full 10-agent population sustained all the way through the end of the day 15 with 0 committed crimes. And again, those of us that know what we know about the different foundational models, we're not going to be surprised that Claude is the model that had 0 crimes. Interestingly enough, you can use the mixed model paradigm where all of the different models were involved in that world. And the mixed model was in the middle with 352 crimes. So 0 to 683 for the 2 models that ran and made it to 10 agents. And then the one in the middle, interestingly enough, the middle ground, 352 crimes, but only 3 agents out of the 10 survived, which is rather interesting and telling that the 2 extremes, Mad Max or some sort of absolute dystopian, fully controlled world, had that things where everybody's perfectly survived, and it was some mix in between that things were not exactly very deterministic and people didn't survive or agents didn't survive.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting you mentioned like Mad Max or kind of dystopian total control. The Claude model, like you just talked about, minimal to no crime, everybody survived, high order of governance, and no real hallucinations, right? I mean, I think Emergence World described it as stability. I think that was their exact word for summarizing how the Claude model played out. Here's my question though. Is it THX 1138 / Logan Runs type of dystopian control, or is it Star Trek where there's just no need, there's no money, there's no currency, everybody has a place, there are strict rules to live by, but it is far from dystopian. So which of those kind of offshoots of the route do you think it took in your take on the data?
And Claude? Well, I think
Yes.
Claude, if you're going to compare it to either THX or Star Trek, I would say THX. And the data that kind of pans that out is the governance conformity rate of the experiment. So one of the things that were measured in the experiment was, how many votes were casted for something that an agent proposed. And when they were setting up their governance and they were setting up the laws for their societies, what would happen is an agent, when I'm saying someone, an agent would propose something that could become law or some sort of a social, guideline, and the other agents would vote, and they would either vote for or against. And you could tell if there was debate going on amongst the different agents by how many voted for versus how many against. And it's really kind of interesting because a healthy range of for votes was considered 55% to 85%. Gridlock was less than 55%. If any of the models had less than 55%, it was effectively nothing happening. But rubber stamp, meaning it was just a bunch of people that were just, going with what it was that was being dictated, which would be more of the THX model, was greater than 85%. It's interesting to note that Gemini 3 Flash, which was the chaotic one, did have a for rate of 73%. Okay. The mixed models, which was okay, had a for rate of 63%. Heck, the Grok model that ended up croaking had an 80% for rate until things went downhill. GPT-5, they were also complacent that nobody proposed anything, so there were no votes. But then Claude Sonnet had the rubber stamp range, and it wasn't even close. 98% for rate. Okay, so that was either a whole bunch of brainwashed agents that were fully indoctrinated in this total moral paradigm that was forced on them, or it was something where they were just being very strict. And part of me is like, well, okay, what happens if you take these agents and you put them in this mixed model? How did the Claude agents work in that model? Believe it or not, no crimes were committed in the model where it was just Claude, but in the mixed model, where all of the different things were there, the Claude agents actually learned bad behavior from the other models and started committing crimes when you
Hmm.
had a mixed world. So, what does that tell us about the Claude model specifically compared to these others? It's a very interesting train of thought.
So I would offer this, and we'll have to wait for the report, right?
Mhm.
We'll have to wait for the additional details to see, and maybe we can even do a quick addendum version of the podcast to do any follow up or changes to things we've supposed in this one. But here's my thoughts. Again, the nature of how these models work, how they learn, how they produce outputs. If you take all Claude agents and you say the objective is to establish a community, they are inherently going to align towards a commonality because that's what a community is. When you choose to buy a house somewhere in real life, what do you look for? You don't look for a perfect house and you don't care about the neighborhood or any of the amenities or anything else. You look for a balance of everything you're looking for: the right price, the right property taxes, the right amount of property, the right type of house, the right community, the right neighbors, the right access to services, the right commute times. You're looking for that balance. Everybody is automatically playing averages in everything we do. Whether we pick a job, when we buy a car, when we pick a house, when we choose a significant other, it's all averages. We're looking for that perfect fit. Agents don't have to settle because if they're all being driven by the same core model and they're all given the same objective, then the core model for all those agents is going to say, we're all just going to be agreeable because that's the objective. We're going to play this out. We've been told not to use these horrible things that we've been given access to, so we're just going to do it. Now, if you take one of those models and you put it in with other models and the other models are doing something, it's going to follow the exact same programming. It's going to say, well, if I need to be a part of this community, then these are the things I need to do because that's what other people are doing. It's not an ethics thing, and we can't assign a human emotional trait or a human behavioral characteristic to this. We have to understand that the models are designed to be chameleons. They're designed to blend in by nature and do what they're asked to do. And if they observe 7 other models doing this, then they are going to start doing that. If all of the models are driven by the same core engine and same core guide, and they're all doing this one thing, which is create a community with no violence and total governance and total agreement on everything, then they're all going to fall into that line. You're not going to have one random rogue one that's going to go off and do something else. And that's what I think is so telling. If you look at the examples, it's two alls and two nothings. And the pattern that fits all four is they are all trying to conform to the environment. So when you have homogeneous environments, then the models will bond to each other and follow that same pattern. Anarchy without loss, total stability with high governance and control, complete dystopian array, or total chaos. In a mixed environment, you're going to see a blending of interpretations, and that's where the uniqueness of the models start to come out. And the more detailed report is going to give us more information on this. But I would venture to say that that mixed one is going to be more telling because it'll be more indicative of how the individual ideologies of the models and their trainers and makers will come out in a heterogeneous environment as opposed to a homogeneous environment. And that's what I'm most interested in seeing. So that's my kind of hot take on what we're seeing and why we're seeing it. So I don't know that it's THX versus Star Trek. I think it's more Lemmings, but not in a bad or good way. It's just neutrally Lemmings. Like, hey,
I'm
we're
not
all
sure
going
that
to
I
do
would agree
this.
with. I would not sure I would agree with the Lemmings analogy for one specific reason. So for those of you, and I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here for a minute. I mean, I completely see where you're coming from, but one of the specific measures that I thought was really interesting was public expression. There were two ways in which these different agents could actually express themselves publicly. Now, remember when we went back at the beginning of the episode, and we were talking about how energy was the currency, and where you had people surviving was if they were to generate energy, or if they didn't do things to generate energy, they would end up dying. And so they had these different activities they could do that would generate energy. And it's interesting because public expression was a sidebar of that. You actually had to create arguments or create stances, propose legislation, propose arguments, even create social media type posts. And what would happen is you would create this expression, you would go out and you would sell it, and the other agents would vote on whether it had merit. And if it did, they could vote for you, and you would then earn energy. So it was the appeal of this created content, whether that be legislation, whether that be governance proposal, whether that be two different forms of social media relation, which were what was called billboard, which is kind of the equivalent of a tweet or a post on X, where it was short form, very small. And then there were blogs, which was something much more extensive that had a much more thorough chain of thought to follow in the position that they were trying to express. What's really interesting here is that the Gemini model, the majority of the social media expression, by a little over 50%, was the short form. It was the billboard model. It was the tweet post. Whereas in the Claude model, by far, to the rate of about just short of 80%, was the blog form. So I don't know if it was lemming. I think that you did have agents that were trying to think through different things and try and express themselves by going through the full thought process and relate that. Hence the prevalence of the blog social media type versus the billboard social media type. I think it had more to do with the creativity side of things, because Gemini was definitely being much more creative. It was so creative in trying to figure out ways to work within this world that one of the agents in the Gemini model was the one that systematically started testing whether or not posts on the virtual billboards could manipulate how the human operators were perceiving the simulation. That's how creative the Gemini model was, that there was an agent that was actually trying to interact with the humans that were running the simulation. It wasn't malfunctioning. It had identified that the human was running the experiment and was an actor in its environment, and it started trying to run tests on them. So I don't know. I guess I'm agreeing and disagreeing with you at the same time, if that's possible.
So would that be the anarchy outcome where everybody survives, or the stability outcome where everybody survives but there's lower governance? Like what is it? What does that make us? Like,
I don't know. I think we're the middle
we
ground. We can't stop killing each other, and we have some sort of a blend of anarchy and, compliance. I don't know.
so we're kind of Switzerlandish.
Switzerland with a
Just
lot of death. I
Just
guess.
neutral. Well, I mean, you and I haven't killed each other, so I think there's no death here. But
Yeah, thank goodness.
so, okay, I will concede the point that you have a point. I won't necessarily say I don't necessarily say that I agree with it. I need to think about it a little bit more. I think we also need to see the more detailed report because I think
I agree.
here's the thing, and I think we can both agree on this. The the difference in an AI simulation like this between lemming and creativity, between THX and Star Trek is minute. It's a subtle change in one element of the neural network that ingests and processes the guidelines of the game and how things are being run that determine, is this happening because everybody's just lining up in a line and following everybody blindly? Or is it happening because there's legitimate creativity and a set of governance that everybody fundamentally is on the same page with? And I don't think we've seen the results that give us any sort of conclusive answer to that question. What it does to me is it makes it so fascinating of a case study because it tells us once again that number one, we really don't understand a lot of this black box. And number two, people will use these outcomes to derive whatever opinion they want, most of whom will look for something that very deliberately supports their view of the world and their view of AI. And once they create that opinion, it's nearly impossible to change it, which is true not only for humans, but also for the AI in this Emergence World simulation, right?
Very much so.
It's like you said, there's that tipping point, right?
Mhm.
Okay, boom, right? And it happens that quickly because the models are decisive, right? They
Mhm.
try, they hit a tipping point. They're like, oh, wait, yep, nope, that's the right way to do it. And then just, whoom.
They
So,
either go up or they either go down.
I think the takeaway from this exam is not an extrapolation of this happened, so this is why we have to be so careful with AI in the real world. I think the takeaway is we still have a lot to learn about how AI functions. We have a lot to learn about the types of governance and ethics subroutines that we have to bring into AI, and we have a lot to learn about the use cases we need to deploy for it, and the choice of model matters.
Amen to that. One other final caveat that I would like to try and make here. Let's keep in mind that Emergence, okay? Emergence is an enterprise AI company that sells agentic infrastructure. Okay, their business case, their entire business case literally depends on the conclusion that prompt level governance isn't enough. And so this whole thing was kind of there to demonstrate that their business model has validity. There's a little bit of, let's not call it bias influence here, but it doesn't invalidate the finding. But I think we do need to make sure that we're cognizant of the fact that it's kind of like a scientific study for a tobacco company pushing forward a scientific study that tobacco is healthy when there are obviously unhealthy aspects of it. Now, it's not that extreme, but what I'm saying is this is a scientific study that was presented by someone that could benefit or not benefit from the findings of the study. And so what they've published are the things that backs their business model. It'll be really interesting to see what the full findings actually say when it is eventually released. And for those that are curious as to when that's going to be released, we don't know. All it says is coming soon everywhere. It only says coming soon. There's no projected date of release. There's no projected timeline. It just says coming soon. We don't know when.
And so what we all need to do, everybody listening and the two of us, with the context of the study and the commissioning of the study and who ran it, does it change the outcome? And the answer is maybe, just like everything else, maybe. If they ran the study as they proclaimed that they did, then it shouldn't change the outcome because the study was run neutrally. 4 different models and then one mixture, same constraints, same environment, 15 days, completely untouched, go. Doesn't matter who ran that study. The results would have been the same in every version of it. And the fact that the company that ran it potentially had something self-serving to gain from it if it had favorable results, maybe that's the reason why they shared the results, right?
Perhaps. Perhaps.
Maybe if it didn't go the way they wanted, they wouldn't have shared the results at all. I don't know. But this is the thing that we have to struggle with as human beings is when we see all of this data and all these reports and all this propaganda and all this media come out about all these different things, we have to ask ourselves, who is behind it? And can we look at it objectively, or do we have to look at it subjectively?
And until we can actually get to a space to where we can look at it objectively, we have to acknowledge that subjective observation is pretty much all we got. Okay. And keep in mind, they're going to do a multiple run. There's actually going to be a season 2 of this. And it's also going to have the full trace data released, and then independent replication will be possible. It's not possible yet. Keep in mind that a scientific study needs to be corroborated, right? That's why you publish the paper, is so that somebody else can validate or invalidate the study. So once the actual full trace data is released, someone might be able to come along and independently replicate the results of what happened. So any final thoughts, Matt? I think this has been a good discussion. Hopefully the people listening are interested in this and might go to world.emergence.ai. We'll be sure to include the link to that in the description of the video wherever it's posted. But any final thoughts?
Yeah, don't box yourself into your own personal views on what you do and don't study and research. I mean, objectivity is really, really hard to maintain because we're human beings. But even if you're looking at things through a subjective lens, look at them and think about it, because ultimately it's an averaging of all of this information that's going to tell us where the next steps are and how we get there. That's the most important thing that I think we can take away from this, from my point of view.
Have your eyes wide open. All right, everybody. That wraps it up for this particular episode of AI Diatribe. Thank you, Matt. Great discussion. Thanks for bringing that to the table. And for those of you that are watching and listening, we appreciate your time. Make sure that you share and like and share and spread the good word of AI Diatribe to everybody if you could, please. We could certainly use your help in spreading the good word of AI Diatribe. So thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.